So I had a whole video planned out about current events and how the continued degradation of civilization is tied to modern technology. Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. We were going to talk about anarcho-tyranny and how everything we're seeing happen is directly tied to that concept. Or, at the very least, that's the way it seems. Anyway, it's more than that though. If you combine human psychology, you know that need that people have to just, fit in within the tribe. And on top of that, if you add in the weaponized algorithms on social media and the bougie goals of controlling the populace, well, I got a little bit too black-pilled. So we are not going to go down that path today. And I really want to try to find some kind of silver lining. There's got to be one somewhere. I mean, who's selling some hope? Because I could use some right about now. Anyway, tonight, we have some other black pill events to talk about. Yes, that's right, we have some new Epstein information to catch up on. And while I was looking into it, I just figured I could take you with me. First, I want to set the stage a little bit and remind everybody that the Epstein stuff was not a well-kept secret. As you are about to hear, in DC, they all knew what Epstein was doing.
It hides in plain sight. Epstein was hiding in plain sight. We all knew about him. We all knew what he was doing. But we had no one that was, legal aspect that would go after him. They were afraid of him. For whatever reason, they were afraid of him.
Yes, that's right, and I quote, "We all knew what Epstein was doing." However, she says that they were afraid. Now, why would they be afraid to stand up to Epstein? Well, my guess would be because he's a source for intelligence, which was stated by the FBI during Epstein's 2008 trial. They said, and I quote, "Epstein belonged to intelligence," end of quote. As I said, this was revealed during the Sweetheart deal. Now, also keep in mind, that was back in 2008. A lot of the people that we're going to talk about today met and visited the infamous Pedo Island after that first conviction. So yes, they all knew what he was doing and didn't care. And in fact, lobbied services from Epstein even after it was public knowledge. So we should not be giving these guys any benefit of the doubt. Anyway, let's see what's going on with the Epstein news and just try to catch up a little bit. So, do you remember that time the Attorney General for the Virgin Islands submitted a lawsuit against JP Morgan and Epstein? And then Joe Biden flew down there and suddenly she got fired. Well, it seems that things are still moving on that front, somehow. I don't know how, but I'm glad they are because we're getting some new details. I mean, as we know, every single person within the establishment wants this story to die. But it's not, and that's in part because of all of you. We will not let it go, and I truly believe that we cannot let it go. And perhaps, maybe, just maybe, there is a silver lining here too. I mean, there has to be some good people still within the system. Otherwise, we would not be getting any information about this. Anyway, that JP Morgan lawsuit is revealing some interesting information. According to a court ruling, former Barclays boss Staley is alleged to have abused victims at late financier Jeffrey Epstein's Virgin Islands retreat. So, okay, within this document, they apparently rejected motions to dismiss complaints claiming that JP Morgan and Deutsche Bank, that they were actually liable for the alleged facilitation of Epstein's sex crimes. And so instead, the ruling revealed that Staley used aggressive force in his sexual assault of one anonymous victim, currently going by Jane Doe. And he actually informed her, and he said, and I quote, that he had Epstein's permission to do whatever he wanted to her, end of quote. So how exactly did this operation work? Well, victims claim that Jeffrey Epstein agreed to bring valuable clients to JP Morgan in exchange for Staley to use his influence with the banks to make Epstein quote-unquote untouchable. So Staley has been accused of abusing these victims personally and visited young girls at Epstein's apartments, exchanging some 1,200 emails with Epstein from 2008 to 2012, and those emails even included pictures of young women in quote-unquote seductive poses. And really, let's take a break for a second and focus on the dates. So Epstein was first arrested in 2006 and given the FBI Sweetheart deal in 2008. And then, after that, that's when these guys start to get involved with Epstein. So yeah, of course they knew what was up. Anyway, so this guy right here, Staley, is a devotee of Davos. And hey, do you remember that infamous photo of Bill Gates with Jeffrey Epstein? Well, standing on the end here is Staley. Yep, right there. So if you don't know, Staley headed JP Morgan's private banking division and started to service Epstein's account around the year 2000. Now from here, things get even crazier. So lawsuits brought against JP Morgan allege that Staley had first-hand knowledge of Epstein's operation, and they now claim that he was actually directly involved. So let's talk about those 1,200 emails between Epstein and this guy right here, this piece of shit. Anyway, according to the lawsuit, these communications show a close personal relationship and profound friendship between the two men, and even suggests that Staley may have been involved in Epstein's sex trafficking operation, end of quote. Now, in December 2009, after Epstein had been convicted of soliciting prostitution from a minor, he purportedly sent 2 emails to Jess Staley. And the crazy part is, each of those emails contained a photograph of a young woman. So yeah, right after Jeffrey Epstein is arrested for sexually assaulting minors, he sends Jess Staley photographs of a minor. Now, okay, so those images are actually completely redacted in the complaint, which of course they should be. However, one of them was actually described in the ruling. So, one photo dated December 5th, 2009 is described as, and I quote, attached a picture of a young woman in a sexually suggestive pose, end of quote. So, Jess Staley's attorney actually refused to comment on those images. And of course, they don't want to comment on that. Of course. However, let's move on. Yes, we have to talk about some other information related to billionaire LinkedIn co-founder Reid Hoffman. So this guy, Reid Hoffman, is a Democrat mega-donor, and on top of that, he visited Jeffrey Epstein's private island, and he actually had plans to stay at Epstein's notorious Manhattan townhouse back in 2014. Yes, that is correct. Reid Hoffman paid a visit to Epstein's Caribbean island, Little St. James, also known as Pedophile Island, where Jeffrey Epstein and his Madame Ghislaine Maxwell abused underage girls. Now, apparently, according to documents obtained by the Wall Street Journal, this is all in relation to Joy Ito, who at the time was MIT Media Lab director, and was also in attendance on the island. So apparently Joy Ito asked Reid Hoffman and Epstein to help him raise funds for MIT. So these 3 guys were getting pretty chummy, and apparently they had plans to revisit Epstein Island in November 2014, and following this trip, Hoffman and Joy Ito were scheduled to travel with Epstein to Palm Beach, and then to his tropical residence, and then from there to Boston. So according to these documents, we have Hoffman's plan to stay the night at the townhouse, and then apparently on the next morning, the venture capitalist planned to attend a quote-unquote breakfast party where the likes of Epstein and Bill Gates were scheduled to be in attendance. However, that's not all. Reid Hoffman also invited Epstein to a huge dinner in Silicon Valley to meet with big tech CEOs. However, it gets even more crazy, so keep in mind the dates. So these guys were actually visiting Jeffrey Epstein's island and hanging out with him well after his first conviction. Jeffrey Epstein had pleaded guilty in 2008 to soliciting a minor for prostitution, and on top of that had a decades-long association with Ghislaine Maxwell. And of course was running this operation with Ghislaine Maxwell, who in 2021 was convicted on federal charges of sex trafficking and conspiracy. And yeah, she was charged for sex trafficking minors to nobody, apparently. So despite his ties to Jeffrey Epstein, Reid Hoffman has hardly hidden from the public eye. Last month, for example, he publicly defended his bankrolling of E. Jean Carroll's rape lawsuit against Donald Trump. Yes, you heard me correctly. The Democrat mega-donor and the one who is funding the case against Donald Trump was himself entangled with Jeffrey Epstein. Oh, the irony. And he's actually been doing the bidding for the establishment for years. Reid Hoffman was forced to issue an apology in 2018 for funding a group that falsely tried to give the impression that the Russian government was supporting Alabama Republican Roy Moore. So yeah, we have Epstein, a Democrat mega-donor, bankrolling smear campaigns and pushing to get Trump put in prison. That is a lot of dirty work he has to do for politicians, and I don't think it's a stretch to imagine that they have some blackmail tapes on this guy. And in fact, I'd probably put money on it. So yeah, Reid Hoffman, this guy, gave millions and millions to left-wing groups, came up with the plan to go after Trump, gave Biden $1.5 million in 2020, and if you're giving up millions to Democrats and on top of that are also in Epstein's club, well then yeah, you get some perks, I guess. And yes, those perks mainly come in the form of political access. So according to the White House, Reid Hoffman visited the White House 5 times last year. And one of those visits was a meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron. The other 4 trips were meetings with Madeleine Strasser, who at the time advised then White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain. And if I remember correctly, wasn't he involved in the Clintons too? You know, Chinagate and the Epstein meetings back in the 90s? Anyway, I don't know. Now he also met with Kimberly Lang, who at the time was the executive assistant to Biden's national security advisor, and Jordan Finkelstein, a special assistant to Biden and chief of staff to the president's senior advisor. So yeah, lots of political access for him, huh? However, let's get into Epstein and the CIA. And I quote, Jeffrey Epstein's private calendar emerges. Among prominent names listed are Joe Biden's CIA chief and Goldman Sachs top lawyer. Okay, so keep in mind that this is all after that sweetheart deal trial in 2008. They all knew. I mean, of course they knew. And yeah, we already showed the clip of John McCain's wife talking about it. So yeah, they knew alright. They knew. So yeah, in that clip they say that they were afraid. Now, as we talked about before, why would they be afraid? And that's because Epstein was tied into the CIA. And I quote, the Wall Street Journal reports that in 2014, current CIA Director William Burns had 3 meetings with Jeffrey Epstein. And this occurred when William Burns was Obama's Deputy Secretary of State, and after Epstein had been convicted of child sex exploitation. The director of the CIA actually met with Epstein a few times. The first time was in Washington, D.C., and then he was scheduled to go to his Manhattan townhouse after. So yeah, we have William Burns, who became the CIA director under Joe Biden in 2021. And he first met Epstein while he was preparing to leave his position in the government in 2014. So, let me get this straight. If you're preparing to leave the government, why would you need a meeting with Jeffrey Epstein? It doesn't really make that much sense. So now he claims that they only met once and that was it. However, their relationship seems to be a bit more cozy than that. So the future CIA director and Jeffrey Epstein had a dinner plan at the law firm of Steptoe and Johnson in Washington, D.C. And then Jeffrey Epstein scheduled 2 evening appointments that September with William Burns at his townhouse in Manhattan. However, he also planned to take Mr. Burns to the airport after. So, what were they doing in the townhouse in Manhattan? Well, our imaginations can run wild with that one, but I'm sure it has to do with either money, intelligence, or young women. So we know for a fact that William Burns, the current CIA director, is lying about multiple things. His current statement is, and I quote, the director does not recall any further contact, including receiving a ride to the airport, end of quote. And yeah, I really doubt that. More than likely, there's a lot more going on beneath the surface. Now, okay. 1 month after meeting Jeffrey Epstein in October 2014, William Burns stepped down from his role in the State Department. And from there, he went on to serve as president of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, a think tank. And William Burns ran that think tank until he was nominated by Joe Biden to serve as CIA director in early 2021. And now, let's move on to the Goldman Sachs lawyer. Jeffrey Epstein had dozens of meetings with then Obama White House attorney Catherine Remler, who went on to become Goldman Sachs' top lawyer in 2020. Epstein also planned for her to join him in 2015 on a trip to Paris, and in 2017 to visit his private island in the Caribbean, Pedo Island. So, according to a spokesman for Goldman Sachs, Remler had a quote-unquote professional relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, which was tied to her role at a different law firm and did not travel with him, they say. And yeah, once again, I doubt that's true. However, she does say, and I quote, I regret ever knowing Jeffrey Epstein, end of quote. And no, again, I doubt that. You're just upset that you got caught. Now, the reason I say that is because according to documents, they knew each other pretty damn well. And of course, this is following Epstein's 2006 conviction for sexually abusing girls in Florida as young as 14 years old. So again, yes, she knew about it. And yeah, there's a lot of proof that their relationship was more than just professional. For example, Jeffrey Epstein was visiting apartments that she was considering to buy so he could check them out and make sure they were good enough. The documents also expose that in October 2014, Jeffrey Epstein knew about her travel plans and told his assistant to look into her flight. And I quote, see if there's a first-class seat, Epstein wrote. If so, make sure to get her an upgrade, end of quote. So this chick right here, Catherine Remler, was also a part of Obama's White House. And in fact, in 2014 as well, he planned a series of meetings to introduce her to his acquaintances, getting her to move up the ladder for sure. So perhaps you're asking yourself, how did Catherine Remler and Jeffrey Epstein meet? Well, apparently Jeffrey Epstein reached out to her back in 2014 to see if she would be interested in representing the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Now, that never panned out. However, it's very interesting that she was going to get the nod for this position through Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein was going to tell Bill Gates who to hire. That's crazy. Now, according to other documents, Jeffrey Epstein and his staff actually discussed if Miss Remler, now 52, would be quote-unquote uncomfortable with the presence of young women. 2 women actually emailed Jeffrey Epstein on 2 separate occasions to ask if they should avoid the house while Miss Remler was there. Jeffrey Epstein told one of them that he did not want her around. However, he told the second woman it's not a problem. So yes, once again, Catherine Remler knew exactly what was going on with Jeffrey Epstein and did not care enough as long as her professional and political ambition was fulfilled. So Jeffrey Epstein also connected Catherine Remler to Ariana de Rothschild, the current CEO of the Swiss private bank. So this individual, Ariana de Rothschild, who married into the famous banking family, the Rothschilds, met with Epstein over a dozen times. In September 2013, Epstein asked Miss Rothschild in an email to help find a new assistant, a female who must know multiple languages and is organized. Miss Rothschild emailed back, "I'll ask around," end of quote. Now apparently the Rothschilds would go to auctions for Jeffrey Epstein, and one time they spent $1 million on him. This happened between 2014 and 2015. Now in 2019, after Epstein was arrested, the bank said that Mrs. de Rothschild never met with Epstein and it has actually no business links with him. However, we do know that's a lie. And we know that's a lie because in 2015 she negotiated a $25 million contract for Epstein's Southern Trust Company. So okay, let's check out a few other notable names in the new report. Who met with Jeffrey Epstein? Well, we have Leon Boston, who is the president of Bard College. And then of course we have Noam Chomsky. From there, we have anthropologist Helen Fisher, which is pretty weird. And then we have Josh Ramo, who is the co-chief executive of Henry Kissinger's corporate consulting firm. We have a Harvard professor, Martin Nowak, and former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. So from there, let's jump into the former Israeli Prime Minister, because there's quite a few rumors that Epstein was actually Mossad, and I think there is a valid argument to that. So, Jeffrey Epstein first met the former Israeli Prime Minister due to Noam Chomsky. This is crazy. So, as it turns out, it was actually Noam Chomsky that arranged the meeting with Jeffrey Epstein for the former Israeli Prime Minister to meet with Epstein to discuss, and I quote, Israeli policies with regard to Palestine and the international arena, end of quote. So the former Israeli Prime Minister said that he met with Jeffrey Epstein pretty often, especially when he took trips to New York. Now he says that Jeffrey Epstein invited people such as Mr. Ramo, Henry Kissinger's dude, and then Noam Chomsky. And every time they met, they simply discussed geopolitics and other topics. He said, and I quote, he often brought other interesting people from art or culture, law or science, finance, diplomacy, or philanthropy. And yeah, I doubt that. It's probably due to young women, but whatever. So this guy Noam Chomsky had quite the interesting response when he was asked about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. He said, and I quote, the first response is that it's none of your business, or anyone's. Second is that I knew him and we met occasionally, end of quote. He then went on to say something even more crazy. He said, and I quote, what was known about Jeffrey Epstein was that he had been convicted of a crime and that he had served his sentence. He went on to say that according to U.S. law, that yields a clean slate, end of quote. And yeah, maybe in most cases I agree with you, Noam Chomsky. However, when it comes to Epstein, you don't get that luxury. The Jeffrey Epstein saga is one of the most effed up stories in my lifetime. And yeah, feigning ignorance or playing stupid is not going to cut it. We have to keep pushing for answers.
We've seen the same thing happen with Epstein with these scientists that we saw happen in Hollywood and we saw happen up on Wall Street in New York, where he starts spreading money around.
The scientist who's funded by Jeffrey Epstein is creating these interactive dolls that go into the bedroom of some little girl that records what she's saying, watches what she's doing, feeds this information back to some system somewhere, some mainframe. The fact that Epstein's behind it, you have to ask, what was the plan?
Okay, wow, that just kind of scared me, as well as give it up for little Sophia, everybody. Bye-bye. I love that.
And my guess is it represents some very powerful structure that we tripped over, that this was constructed. I mean, we have a very famous case of a guy named Eli Cohen, who was fitted with a backstory and became a playboy in Damascus and held orgies, if I understand correctly, where he collected information and leverage against people in the Syrian government. If you take that situation, this looks remarkably similar. We've got a guy who was apparently a math teacher at a private high school, and the next thing we know, he's avoided jail in some sort of financial scandal, and he's suddenly set up as a mystery financier with connections to absolutely everyone in the top echelons of power.
I know that Jeffrey was selling arms.
How do you know that?
Where the money comes from, nobody knows. If you want to get somebody in the show, you'll never get them, but Leslie Wexner, the fellow who owned the Limited and Victoria's Secret, and was very involved with Epstein in terms of business, as much as we know.
Okay, so he would know. He would know where
He knows some stuff. I mean, he had something to do with Epstein getting that 28,000 square foot apartment,
okay.
which I don't know. It seemed like Epstein never paid for it. How could we, since 2006, not pay any attention to the story?
When I met Jeffrey Epstein, which might have been something like 2002, before he was charged with sex crime violations in Florida, it was like somebody created a Gatsby-like character out of a Ralph Lauren lookalike who had apparently recently been a math teacher at a private high school. Nothing added up. I did not believe that Jeffrey Epstein was a hedge fund manager. And I, in fact, called my wife at the time and I said, this man appears to be a construct. And she said, what do you mean by a construct? And I said, it's like they've hired an actor to play a hedge fund manager.
We did hear that today, apparently, President Trump had some sort of falling out with Epstein, but he didn't elaborate. We do know that he did kick him out of Mar-a-Lago at one point. What can you tell us about that?
Well, there are two incidents there. One was apparently there was a member and Epstein was inappropriate with the member's daughter. The other piece, and I interviewed a woman who would run the spa there, and I said, did you know Jeffrey Epstein? She said, oh, yes. She said, he used to come over to the spa, and I found him to be inappropriate with the girls, the young girls there. And she said, I went to Mr. Trump, and he threw him right out.
Epstein used blackmail to manipulate people. Maintaining a control file is a very old trick of the agencies and still used today. French modeling agent Jean-Luc Brunel has started agencies with Epstein, and both share a long history.
It's a me, Marcus. You are there for the purpose of somebody wanting to take you home to bed. He's got the agency, he's got the girls. His friends say, oh, Jean-Luc, I'd like to meet some girls, or we're having a party tonight. Can you bring some girls?
And what happens if you say no?
You don't work.
You actually have known that he has made someone pay a professional penalty for saying no.
I know, I paid a penalty for saying no.
But his usefulness eventually came to an end. Epstein and Jean-Luc both died in prison by suicide, allegedly.
Once again, this is HelioWave. If you like the content, like, comment, and subscribe. Share the video if you want to. If you're in a position to, consider subscribing on Locals or Subscribestar. As always, make sure you disobey those true fascistas, and yes, I do hope you have a good night.